Hello everyone, we should be live. My name's Anna and I'm from Forefront Events, and welcome to today's virtual panel on DevOps, building a sustainable continuous improvement culture. It's wonderful to have so many of you joining us today. We have got over 100 engineering and DevOps and security professionals joining us, so welcome. I can see you all jumping on. Just before we do begin today's panel, I'd just like to go through some housekeeping briefly. So if you look to the right of your screen, you will see that we have two tabs open, one for questions and one for polls. So we do have some pre-prepared questions to begin the panel today, but we really love to have interaction from our audience. And it's a great opportunity for you to have any of your questions answered by our panel. So if you'd like to put any questions you have in there throughout the panel, that would be wonderful. You can also upvote other people's questions as well. So if someone's already asked the question that you had in mind, give it an upvote and it will let our moderator know that that's an important one to answer. We also have some polls that are live, so if you'd like to take some time now to just go and vote in those polls, it's a great way to give our moderator and our panelists a bit of an idea of where you and our audience are up to with your DevOps journey and any challenges that you're having in this space. So I now have the pleasure of passing you over to our moderator for today, Paul Wilcox from Sumo Logic. So thanks, take it away, Paul.
Thanks, Anna. Thank you, everybody, for joining, whether you're joining from your bedrooms, your bathrooms, your dining tables or your offices. I appreciate the time, and hopefully this is a worthwhile exercise. My name's Paul Wilcox. I'm privileged to host an incredible panel of industry thought leaders and luminaries for this session on building a sustainable continuous improvement culture. It's a bit of a mouthful, but I don't think there's a word that we could take out of that for efficiency reasons. They're all really important parts of the conversation. Sustainability, continuous, and culture, I think, are really, really critical in this conversation. So a quick introduction on me first, and then I'll hand over to the panelists to introduce themselves, and we'll dive into what I'm sure is going to be a really good discussion. I'm fortunate enough to lead an incredibly fast-growing and talented team across Asia-Pac, and here at Sumo Logic, we actually build a platform which, by its very nature, is a key part of our internal continuous improvement culture. In fact, the industry that we're in is classed by Gartner and other analysts as continuous intelligence platform. So, with that in mind, it's fair to say that not only do we embrace continuous improvement as a value, but it permeates our organisation well beyond DevOps into security operations, customer interactions, and of course our back-end business ops. So with that said, whilst the technology is important, I think the most important term in this heading is culture. It's the people which determine its success, its adoption, and ensuring it becomes part of your organisational DNA. Also, it's critical to understand that when we enact these processes or when we go on this journey, it's the people across the entire organisational spectrum that matter. It's not just the teams, it's not just the leadership. Whilst the messaging to each of those parts of the organisation are going to be different, it's important that we understand what our outcomes are, what we're trying to achieve, and the path that we're going to take to get there. It is a long journey. It's not something that happens, you can't say we're going to build a sustainable continuous improvement culture and we're going to be doing it in the next couple of weeks. It's a lifelong journey. It's something that we work on very, very hard, and hopefully you get a lot of insight from our panelists today. So to kick that off, I'll hand over to each of the panelists to do a quick introduction, and we'll do it in order around the screen. Leo, you are the first.
Cool. Thanks, Paul. Thanks, everyone, for joining. My name is Leo. I work as Director of Engineering for Zipco, particularly in our consumer tribe, so looking after all our consumer products like the mobile app, the website, and all this is that power those user experiences.
Thanks, Leo. Lisa, you're next. I think we've lost Lisa for a second.
I think we lost her, yeah.
Yeah, she's going to grab a coffee, and fair enough, it's been a tough morning already. Wow, that means you're on.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Paul. Welcome, everyone, for joining for this session. I'm Kamal Dankani. I'm Head of Modernization and Engineering Practices at QBE Insurance. My team actually responsible for driving this whole DevOps adoption culture and every aspect of SDLC engineering and the practices. We work closely with the business, the product owners, for them to be onboarded on the technology side of the DevOps and the CI/CD, and also work with them to streamline the processes end-to-end for the organization.
Awesome, thanks, Kamal. And when Lisa jumps back on, we'll break away and do a quick intro with her. But we may just jump into the questions if we can. Obviously, the topic for today is around building a sustainable continuous improvement culture. The big question. Oh, Lisa, we got her. You're back. We missed you.
I'm back. My internet has some troubles.
That's all right. That's all right. If you could introduce yourself, that'd be great.
Yeah, of course. Hi everyone, my name is Lisa. I've recently joined Prosper, one of our leading Australia financial fintechs in the country, and I'm the director of engineering in this really cool organization. We're not a large team, but we are a team that really is passionate about continuous improvement and how can we actually use technology to make a difference in both our customers and our business operations.
Thank you, Lisa. Okay, so jumping into it. Given the topic of today is around building a sustainable continuous improvement culture, I think the first question would be is why is this important and what outcomes are we trying to achieve when we go down this path? So Kamal, I might start with you.
Sure. See, I actually take it to the human basics there. I think it's so easy to overestimate the importance of like one defining movement, and we underestimate the value of making small improvements on a daily basis. Now, too often, we convince ourselves that the massive success requires massive action, whether it's losing weight, building a business, writing a book, etc. List can go on. But we all understand improving that 1% isn't always notable. Sometimes it's not even noticeable. But it can be far more meaningful, especially in the long run. So if we haven't noticed 1% better each day for 1 year, you will end up almost like 37 times better by the time you are done. On the other side, if you get 1% worse each day for 1 year, you probably will get to the zero. So to have the sustainable continuous improvement culture, it's like developing habit. I guess we all as a human understand the habits we develop throughout the life. It's the same thing in developing a culture. So habits, I look at like the compound interest of self-improvements. The same way that the money multiplies through compound interest, the effect of our habits multiply as we repeat them. They seem to make little difference on any given day, but the impact they deliver over the months and years can be enormous. I think that's the way I define the importance of that continuous improvement culture, and the outcome. In a simplistic term, the outcome are always bring it to having a right balance of the velocity for the organization, the performance for the organization, and the quality for the organization. Like always focusing on the value stream and the real outcome with the impact for the business.
Yeah, great points. Leonardo, your perspective on that?
Yeah, so I come at it from a slightly different angle. I agree with what Kamal mentioned. Like small improvements, they really do make a huge impact. A small example, for instance, from my personal perspective, is that a few years back, I wanted to increase my reading habits. And oftentimes people will say, "Oh, I need to, read for 2 hours every day," so that actually happens. And I started really small. I decided to read for 20 minutes before bed for every night and commit to that. And I started doing that consistently, and it really does add up. So now I'm consistently reading 25 to 30 technical books a year, and that makes a big impact. The other side of it as well, when you take that to an organization, is that we need to create time for that continuous improvement. And we really need to balance that out. So the way, I can't remember who first made the analogy, but they compared a business to a sports team. And I really do like that, because if you think about a business as a sports team, then let's say your engineers are your athletes. Now, if you take a marathon runner, for instance, and the way they get better is not, but they have a different cycle of training. There's diet involved, different types of resistance training, and that makes their marathon running a lot better. So if your engineers are consistently just working towards deadlines, they are not getting better. So you need to create the space for this training for their brains and their tooling and their abilities. And that's kind of the perspective that I take on this.
I think that's a really good point. In fact, I wish I could try that approach to reading. I'm currently bombarded with US political news, so it's distracting me at the moment. So I'd like to find that. But I think the sports analogy is great, especially when you think about some of the terms we use in our industry, sprints and and marathons are very appropriate when we talk about the way that we build these teams. So Lisa, what about from your perspective?
I think Leonardo and Kamal has already shared some great points. I guess the couple of things I want to add is, from my perspective, change is the only constant. Like, as humans, we are in technology at the rate that it changes, it is constantly happening. And continuous improvement is kind of a really good way of thinking through change, and actually how do we not be changed because change is forced upon us, but us leading that change and pushing and bringing in the transformation that is required for the organization at the rate at which the organization can adopt it. And the other perspective I see this from as well is continuous improvement is not just a way of working, but it's kind of a way of living and carrying ourselves. And if our teams are really adopting this mindset, we will not only see the transformation from a DevOps.
Oh, no.
Oh, we've lost Lisa. So I'm going to finish her sentence. She's going to say that not only from a DevOps perspective, but from a personal perspective, I think. I think that's really an important point that Lisa was getting to there before the tragedy of her dropping off. But really, it is about those minor wins. It's about those minor improvements. There you go. Lisa's back. I was just finishing your sentence for you, Lisa. So,
thank you.
Yeah, that last bit you said was really insightful. So no, thank you. That was actually some really good points. In fact, that brings me to a question from one of the attendees. And to your point, Lisa, it's not just change for change's sake. There's a big difference between running an organisation that's agile with a lowercase a, that's agile rather than erratic. And I think that's an important thing. We need to find out where the improvements are coming, what we're doing, and how to measure those. And the question we've got from one of the attendees is, can the panel give us some insights into how they're using data to improve performance across their DevOps team? So I suppose, what metrics and measurements are you using to get to that level of improvement? So Leo, we might start with you.
Sure. So I'm a big fan. If you guys haven't had the Accelerate book, I highly recommend you do. It's a great book and really rigorous research on what makes a company tick and have success with DevOps and be agile, really. So they introduced the concept of the DORA metrics, which are 4 metrics to measure company maturity around DevOps. And what I like about them is that they are self-balancing, because a lot of the time when you start measuring something, they you can kind of game that, right? So for instance, if you go really old school, many years ago, maybe decades ago, people were measuring lines of code as a measure of productivity. And then that's great, because I can write really long code that does the exact same thing that a one-liner would do. So it's a great example of gaming that. But then you take, for instance, the 2 of the metrics of the Accelerate book. We talk about MTTR, which is the mean time to recover. So in the event of an incident, how long does it take you to restore service? And then you have the other one, which is release frequency, right? So you want release frequency to be high and MTTR to be low. So if we were, as an example, if we were to measure just MTTR, I can bring MTTR to 0 by not making any changes. Yeah. And then we game that, right? So those four metrics are really key to measure the level of operational maturity of an organization, and runs deep all the way through operation, all the way into the engineering teams. And as we more and more are into this microservices and service-oriented architecture with teams owning their services and their own life cycles, it's important that these metrics permeate through the individual teams so that we can identify hotspots and help them improve as well.
It's actually
so that's you to start.
Yeah, I think DORA is a really good example, and your point about them being self-balancing, I actually had a little bit of an epiphany when you said that. You're absolutely right. In that there's nothing worse than gamed data. And we've seen it throughout our careers. And look, I remember back in the day when we used to write in assembly, and I'm giving away my age here. So
wow,
thanks for laughing, Lisa. Well, I'm giving away my age. We were working with 32K or 64K of code and sort of pressing ourselves to be as efficient as possible in a true sense. It's about outcomes and efficiency, and I think that's really, really important what you brought up there, Leo. So I appreciate that point. Kamal, anything from your end?
Yeah, see, I actually love the metrics there. And I think, okay, on the metrics side, I always ask my team not just to look at the metric at the point of time, but actually to understand the trend with the metrics, because this is like where the real story comes out for the business. if I look at the list of the metrics, the list is long, and I think like as we're getting mature, the list is getting longer as well because the data is there. The good thing in IT and the business is that we tend to, and we have collected so much data, but what we have missed is that to understand the data.
Yeah.
So what we do in parallel is that every sprint generates the data for us. We use the metrics around that. I can go in a list of some of the metrics, but the way we have structure is we've broken down the whole maturity model in the building blocks. Each building blocks has its own metrics, whether it's going in a more technical side, the continuous testing, continuous monitoring, continuous deployment, continuous integration. Each one has a couple of core metrics which actually get available for everyone in the organization to look at the trend, understand the trend there. The focus we always do is finding a right balance, as I mentioned earlier, on the velocity side, the quality and the performance, because sometimes just having a speed is not good enough.
Yeah.
You need to have then the quality and the performance as well. So all metrics, they come in those three big categories for us, and we make it, we use like Power BI. So the Power BI provides the metrics to everyone in the organization because the key is that it has to be transparent. People need to see that.
Yeah, agreed. And I think there's certainly some legs in the idea of looking at trending and looking at anomalous activity rather than fixed metrics that you may have determined up front. So that's a great point, Kamal. Thank you, Lisa.
I don't know if I have anything useful to add at this point, than what Leonardo and Kamal has already shared. I think one of the things that I do want to highlight is, because we're talking about continuous improvement, one of the things that you want to think about as a team is, depending on the maturity of your team and your DevOps practices, you might want to start with a small set of metrics rather than trying to embrace everything at once, because it's about showing this idea of success and that we're making progress, right? And celebrating steps each step of the way, and then bringing in some of these more mature metrics and maybe even like AI and learning that allows us to use automation and detection. Like I like what Kamal's pointing out about trends. There's things like Datadog that I'm not trying to, that they don't sponsor me, but it's one of the tools that we use. And I think it's really handy to have some of these automation and detection to be able to go, hey, there's something going on here. Have you noticed this? And it actually helps, especially if the team is small, to be able to get those insights without us having to necessarily have a large group of people to make informative and sensible choices.
Yeah, of course, Sumo logic instead of Datadog.
Good sponsoring right there, Paul.
Yeah. So actually, let's sort of dive down on that a little bit, Lisa, because I think what's important there is you talk about automation. Whilst we're talking about a cultural change, it can't be burdensome. It needs to be automated, it needs to be frictionless in a lot of respects. So from your perspective, starting that journey, what are important first steps other than just bringing down the metric set to something small and digestible? Is there any other areas that you think we need to look at to get going on this journey? Because there's a lot of attendees that have not yet gone down this path.
Right. From my perspective, I guess a couple of things I want to know. One is, what is your baseline? Where are you starting from? Where does the organization sit right now? Do you have automation process already for your deployment practices? If you don't, maybe a great first step is actually have a CI/CD pipeline. Do you have a change control process? If you don't, a great first step is to actually implement one. I think baby steps make sense, and actually start with what makes sense for you and what is achievable for your team, and looking at their skill sets. And the second thing is, the cool thing about this baseline is you can actually measure it, and then you can show improvement. So, what is the rollback rate of your deployments once you push something out, or how many bugs does your customers actually raise with you, or even your internal teams escalate to you, so that it actually shows and it helps the team to actually get a grasp of, why do we actually need change? What's wrong with what we're doing, without them telling them and say, hey, Paul, you're wrong. Like, this is not good, man. But they can see the stats and they actually go, hold on, something is not quite right here. Let's step back and go, how can we improve this? And showing them that change.
I think that's good, and visibility probably is the underpinning to all that. If you don't looking at it in the first place, it's very hard to baseline. So looking at that data and understanding where you're at today needs to be the first step. Kamal, have you got anything to add to that?
Just like you're going to take it to the non-technical other side, the points here. I think that to start the journey, the key is that the organization having a very clear understanding of their value and the behaviors what they have now. Because the cultural change, it depends on the behavior and the belief change. So we need to have a very clear defined purpose and the motivation. And the organization needs to invest in a training there. I actually split the behavior change into 3 categories. One is an organization can go and take the outcome-based approach for the behavior change, or the organization can take the process-based approach. And the third one is the identity-based there. Personally, I like the identity-based because that helps me to decide the type of person or organization you want to be. And it then gives me the motivation to prove it myself with the small wins.
Yeah.
And that's where the culture of incremental releases and sprints and agile way of working kicks in and helps us to drive the change. And the 4 principle which I always follow in this journey is that make it obvious, the change. Make sure people understand, they talk about it, it's just obvious there. Make it attractive as well. We tend to make things complex, we don't make it attractive. So make it attractive, make it easy, which is same, don't make it complex, because the human behaviors, we follow the law of least effort. We just naturally gravitate towards the option that requires the least amount of work.
Yeah.
So make it easy, and then make it satisfying. The organization needs to think of the reward and the recognition process, because we are more likely to repeat the behavior when the experience is satisfying.
Yep. And I think that's actually a really good point. Outside of the point that you made around it needs to be values-based. I think all of our improvement is based on our corporate values, and obviously our individual values should align with that. And they're not up for debate. Values are a very binary thing, so you don't have to worry about interpretation. So I think that's really good. And the other point that you made there, Kamal, is around giving some reward for effort. But the reward is going to be different for executive in the organisation as to what it is for the individual team members and the practitioners. So you need to understand, what levers need to be pulled there and what you're trying to achieve for both sides of the spectrum. Leo, any addition to that?
No, not really. These guys covered it pretty well.
Right. I'm actually just kicking back and letting them take it. I'm not going to do anything more.
I mean, the only thing I'd mention is that when you start on this journey, right, it's really important to have brand who have done that before. Because it's absolutely possible for a team to work it out on their own and kind of learn from what they can find online, books, etc. But you really do need to bring in a couple of catalysts to work with the teams to really show, hey, this is what it's going to look like once we're well into this journey, and that's crucial as well.
Yeah, it's often a bit of a sell of the blue sky vision, I think, if you like, but it takes individuals that got skin in the game that want to become part of that. So we've got a million questions coming in. One that I'll just quickly point out, is taking us on a slightly different tack, but the question is, are you seeing an uplift in DevSecOps, and how have development teams embraced the shifting of security to the left and adopting security thinking into their coding practices? That's a can of worms we've just opened up there, Sal. Thank you. But yeah, Leo, we might start with you this time.
Sure, it's a great question, because almost by definition, from what I've seen in the companies I've worked for, the engineers aren't necessarily super tuned into what writing actually entails. So there's a few things. So it goes from coding practices, but also the automation that you can put onto your pipeline. Using tools such as SonarQube, you can have vulnerability scanning. GitHub actually just recently released vulnerability scanning into their own tool set as well. So if you're anyone out there already running on GitHub, that you can probably leverage that to start getting some insights into your code bases. And then there's this other tool that I've played around with and potentially might be doing more with them. It's called Secure Code Warrior, which basically gamifies writing secure code. So they present some challenges to you or to your team, to your organization. You go in there and there is a goal, and at the end of that, you learn what was the security flaw with that particular bit of code. And then it has support for multiple different languages. So that gets the engineers really involved into, what does it take to write secure code? And then you add to that the automation or pipeline, and then you start having that shift left happening more often. One caveat that I say with the tools is scanning on project, you're going to be flooded by warnings. So you kind of have to fine tune that in such a way that the team doesn't feel overwhelmed, because you also, the other side of this is that you could get into the trap of fixing security issues for the next 6 months and not shipping anything.
Yeah, it's a balance. Sorry, Leah. It's definitely a balance, and I think it's important. The point you made there about gamifying that process, I think that's incredibly good idea. And I think if you've got tools, sorry, what was the tool that you mentioned?
Secure Code Warrior.
Yeah. I think those kinds of things bring a non-arduous aspect to it, because sometimes it can just seem to be a burden. So, yeah, great point. Lisa, from your experience, I imagine in your organization, security and DevOps are intertwined in many respects.
Yeah, like we actually have a DevSecOps role within our platform team. We don't really have a DevOps team, but it's a platform team, right? We see it as a shared service. It's really the backbone that drives everything else that we do. And we, funny enough, also use this gamification idea where we use Secure Code Warrior to help our team getting on board in terms of thinking through security and how do you apply those practices. One of the things I think our organization does that is quite cool is that we have this community kind of based discussion called Security Champions that's led by our security engineering team. And it's kind of engineers are representing from different of our cross-functional pods joining in this discussion, and they meet on a weekly or fortnightly basis depending on what's happening, and actually talk through, what are the new vulnerabilities, what are some of the things that we can do, and then these champions then bring it back to their teams and advocate for what could be changed. I think that's actually a really nice organic kind of grassroots way of implementing change and bringing about transformation. And then the other side to that as well is metrics, is about this visibility piece. You can probably see something I'm very passionate about. It's always about, if people can see what is being measured, they kind of can work towards that goal because it creates alignment. So we have a weekly engineering organization meeting where our DevSecOps team actually highlights some of the things that we're working on, whatever the focus is going to be, whether it's secrets in code or number of bugs that's coming through. So I think that's also another really great way of incentivizing engineers and create this kind of gamification directly.
Yeah, no, agreed, and yeah, obviously, data-driven decisions are much more appropriate. So looking at logging and metrics and the data that's coming out from your work is super relevant in this particular environment. Kamal, QBE, obviously, I've worked with you guys for 3,000 years, so QBE has got a very strong approach towards security. How are you seeing that interact with the DevOps teams these days?
Oh, absolutely. Actually, I actually stopped calling the team DevOps. It is actually called DevSecOps there. So the security is everyone's responsibility. And I think the time has gone when we used to see security as a blocker. The security is actually enabler. What the organization had to do is engage the security upfront. So changing the culture around, the developer owns the security of the code which they write it, rather than them just handing off the code, someone actually else to find the bug there. So we also capture the metrics at the developer level, the quality of the code coming from each developer and what their trained is, which kind of, it's not like a naming or shaming, it's more like recognizing the people doing the right things there and rewarding them as well. But also, there is a bit of work which needs to happen as the organization gets mature around the industry. Is we tend to write the security policies in the big Word documents, which is hard sometimes or complex to really execute on. So what needs to happen is that also, as the tools are coming, the standards or the policies needs to be written in a codified way there. Because this is a way you can bring the automation. The more automation is there, the more easy it becomes, then it's obvious and it drives the culture.
Yeah, so certainly some of the tools that we've mentioned already that not only automate it, but put a structure around it. make it much more palatable. I think somebody said to me once, asked me the question, what do brakes on a car do? And my obvious response, and I'm sure you'd all say they stop the car. Their perspective was very different to mine. They said brakes actually make the car, allow you to go faster, because you know you can stop the car if you need to. And it was one of the biggest light bulb moment of my life, I think, when you think about security and the way it plays out, especially in the DevOps environment, is knowing that structure's there allows you to maybe not take risks, but expand your capabilities and expand what you're doing, knowing that security envelope is going to catch you if you screw up a little bit. So yeah, really good insights, guys, and appreciate that. So just one more question from the audience, and it's really interesting because it hits at one of my questions, I think. What are some of the techniques for accelerating the cultural adoption of DevOps practices within development teams that are coming from a traditional ops background? And I put my hand up. I probably know more about traditional ops or traditional development than I know about DevOps as a concept or a structure. What do you think are some of the challenges there in transitioning those people from that paradigm to this? We'll start with you, Lisa.
That's a tough one. Okay.
You're so articulate. You're going to handle it.
Thank you. I actually did not come from an ops background. My first DevOps-like experience was being an SRE at Google, right? Which is kind of DevOps on steroids because it's a very different way of thinking and acting, and there's already structures in place. But when I moved out and into other organizations that doesn't actually have those practices in place, and this is where I start seeing this separation of I'm a developer, I deploy something, somebody else's problem, enforce core infrastructure, core hosting platforms, and get them to fix the problems. It's not my problem anymore. But I think one of the things that is a really good shift is people tend to have ownership. Like if you have a team that already has a good culture involved, people actually care about what they build and they want to take pride in the things that they produce. And I find that as a very natural way of integrating ops into development, because it's then a way of helping engineers understand that, okay, it's not somebody else's responsibility. It's about the fact that we can actually deploy things that is a lot more reliable and you can take pride in it because Paul is not coming to us and say, hey, this is broken. Why did you release this? But instead, we already have a rigorous process in place because we tested ourselves. We did our A/B testing. When we release, we have a high confidence level. Things are going well. And if things are failing, we know that it's failing before the user even notices, right? And these kind of motivation and mentality, I find that really helps developers to actually adopt that, and also giving them control and ownership over the end-to-end of the process. Not making it a burden, but making it something that is a way to advance their skills and thinking about you actually get to own the whole pipeline. It's no longer I finished development code, keys over to you ops, please deploy it. But then there's all this friction of how did you write this code? Why is this configuration set up this way? But now you can just do it end to end. You have the power to do so. And I think that that's also another mechanism that really works out with engineers to adopt this DevOps mindset.
You started off by saying, I don't know if I'm the right person. I think you've absolutely nailed that answer. Coming from Google, as you say, they're DevOps by design. It's their religion, and moving into a more traditional organisation, you probably had a bit of boiling frog going on there, where you jumped in and the water was boiling because of those chasms between two parts of an organisation. So I think that visibility that you got was probably better than the rest of us who just had to wait for the temperature to get turned up over time. Kamal, what about from your end? How do you find traditional ops moving into more of a DevOps cultural paradigm?
Yeah, it's an interesting question there, because the DevOps, it has the ops there. When we talk about the traditional ops, the reality is that the DevOps is not like a tool or the system which you can purchase for an organization. It's a cultural framework, it's a way of working, and lots of other principles and those things. You can split that DevOps into the technology and the tool area. You can then go into the culture and the organization structure. You can go into the process and the principle. No way actually it says developer or the operation and those things there. We just created this buzzword, DevOps there. I think it goes back to looking at like a few small things, okay, from adoption point of view, is the reason we think of as that I'm from a traditional ops is because we used to do the handoffs. Right, so a project comes in and then hand off to the BAU. The BAU thinks I have been given mess. I have to look after this mess there, because there was no end-to-end ownership and accountability. And when you go up there, the reason it was happening is because we were always functioning in the project mode.
Yeah.
We were not thinking the product, because the project has a short life cycle. It always look at build this small things, just hand it over and disappear.
Yep.
Where you create the product mindset, it stays there. And also, I think again the key was that the project manager was never thinking from a growth manager point of view, where we make sure that the product owner actually is also the growth manager.
Yeah.
So when you bring that mentality and you mix up the team with the ops and the developers together, but you make sure the team understand end-to-end ownership and accountability, you got the adoption happening. It then becomes a practice. Just keep doing it. Yeah,
that's a really good point. I think the aspect around looking at it holistically rather than looking at the component or the project makes it a lot easier to get an understanding of the outcome required rather than just sort of putting it into your own perspective. So yeah, really good point. Leo, anything from your end?
Yeah, what it comes down to is in a lot of the more traditional orgs, like I've worked at Combank as an example, it's down to change management. So when we start talking about DevOps, that's where things start, the conversations start getting interesting, because change is scary for a lot of these businesses, because historically they had low level of automation and all of these things. So change managers try to put the brakes and slow things down. So which is the exact opposite that we want to do. So if you talk to engineers want DevOps because they keep complaining that, oh, I'm blocked by change management or by ops or whatever. And ops also wants DevOps because they're tired of being at the front line, being woken up at 2 a.m. So there's a lot of alignment there, and where the block comes in is in change management. Now, change management, people are actually really reasonable when you go through the extra step to prove that you're doing the right things.
Yeah.
They're just worried about, is this change going to break things? And if you do the things in the right way, have automated tests, performance tests, infrastructure as code, and you can prove very easily that your change is safe, then they start giving you that space, and that encourages people to go into that journey as well. So it's definitely, there's the technical side, which there's a lot of alignment from the get-go, but then taking the rest of the business in the journey with you.
Yeah, I think that's valid. Change management is a really important part of this, and we sometimes overlook that traditionally that they hold the keys to the kingdom in a lot of respects.
Yeah.
So I think if we do this correctly, and if we have the right tool set that not only says this is how we're doing it and this is how we've tested it before we make those changes, but also if it does turn bad, we can reverse it very quickly. Then change management tend to embrace it a little bit more. So really good point. So we're got about maybe 7 or 8 minutes to go. I'll take one more question from the crowd, and this is obviously a subject that's close to my heart as a vendor of one of these tools. It's what's your approach in choosing a tool over another similar one? So how do you handle it in the team? What does it look like when you determine what you need and then look at what sort of tool is going to satisfy that? Is it democratic? Kamal, we'll start with you.
I think it's interesting what you want there. Do you want to be define or design the process based on the tool, or you first want to understand the business model, the business requirement, the customer need, the customer design approach there, and then look at which tool satisfy those requirements there. Lots of time, from the traditional IT point of view, I find that there is an emotion touch with the tools. And I actually call it that the emotion emotion with the tool is kryptonite for DevOps and innovation, right? But yes, the tool you do need a tool there, because tool and the technology is what can help us to automate, make it easy, and bring some the outcomes there. So the key is first to understand the customer side, the human side, the requirements there. Make sure you can draw that journey and then having some principle around selection of tools. Not going on the commercial, the financial side there. It's more the tool and the adoption of the tool should help you to evolve over the time. If it's gonna lock you down, if it is not really gonna help you from a future integration strategy point of view or the service strategy point of view there, you got a problem. So you need to be clear that you define those principles upfront and then assess the tools against them.
Super valid. In fact, I experience that almost every day when I talk to prospective customers with our businesses. There is an emotional attachment to some of the legacy tools, and you know, I get it. Sometimes individuals have built up their self-worth and they've built up their place in the organisation based around that tool. So to remove it is almost sort of, you know, taking that away from them. So I completely get it. It's almost like you're telling them they have an ugly baby as well. You don't want to do that. Nobody wants that conversation. So I think that's one of the big challenges in organisations is change. Is often brick walled, sometimes not by an entire organisation. Sometimes 95% of the organisation says, this is the way that we go, this is what we want to do, but the other 5% resist it in a majority or in the loudest, and that's challenging. The other point that you made there is around the tool shouldn't be restrictive. It should be a framework, not a built for purpose specific tool, and I think that's an important thing. When you go through this process, it needs to evolve with you and give you the capability to manipulate it on your terms rather than you changing your business practices on the terms of the technology. So Leo, what about in your experience? How have you found that process?
I just choose the one that's on, it has the best website and be done with it. No, I'm kidding.
Yeah, no, well, that's the same. I just signed off a big update to our website based on those terms. So.
There you go. Yeah, no, I'm kidding. So I think the important thing really is to start with the problem is, because and this applies to everything, right? Tools, monitoring tools, all the way to programming languages and frameworks. So people might come and say, "Hey, we should rewrite all of our services in Haskell." Okay, why? What's the problem that we're trying to solve, and what's the value? So we need to start with that, because then we have a framework to evaluate the tool against. And that applies to programming languages, to monitoring tools, to anything really in the organization. Then the other thing that factors in is when you have your list of options, who in the organization has experience with them? Because that factors in, right? How much training are you going to have to do? Because you might have a tool that maybe covers this and everyone knows really well, and you have another one who would get you to 100%, but you have to retrain your whole staff. What's the opportunity cost there? So you need to take that into account as well. And obviously the overall TCO of adopting any new tools or languages or frameworks.
I think that's valid. It's perhaps in some stages there's not experience within the organisation. So it's how intuitive is that tool and how capable are people of ramping up to speed very, very quickly. It's not something that you can take 12 months to get used to. It needs to hit the road pretty quickly if it's foundational to your success. Lisa, Prosper, been in this situation? How have you handled it historically or even in previous lives?
I don't have any specific examples I can speak of at Prosper, but from experience, I think what Kamal and Leo has covered is actually really cool. One of the things I would want to add is, like, with this resistance, the change resistance piece, a lot of it is sometimes just about speaking to the people and actually understanding why are they hesitant about changing. And I really like this idea of going to defining the why, like what is the problem that we're trying to solve? Because if we can, as a team, can get alignment on that, it actually helps people to let go of that ego and refocus the fact that, hold on, it's not about I chose this tool, I got it on board, but it's actually about us trying to solve this common problem together and what is actually the best tool for the job. Like POCs is something that I think is a really important piece, where asking people, why do you think this is a good option for us? How do you compare and contrast? Sometimes people go, what's the point? You know, it's on the website. You're the boss, you make the choice. But I definitely do not want to be the one who's saying to our team, I want you to use this tool, because then if something goes wrong, it's on me and no one else wants to fix it. So this that's the thing I want to highlight, is really working with your team and getting them to have ownership around what are you choosing and what you're bringing on board. Even if it takes a little bit longer, it's often worthwhile having those conversations.
Yeah, it's not always about consensus, because sometimes you won't get everybody. But I think the more buy-in you get, the less friction there will be. And to your point about doing a POC, I think that's super important. The brochure, we all make our brochures look fantastic. So it does everything you want. But doing a POC, and actually I'll add to that, a POC at scale. Often we'll do a POC and we'll have a really tiny set of metrics to determine whether it's a good product or not. Or we'll put in non-production data. We'll just feed we'll dribble some stuff in there to see if it works. Sometimes in the heat of battle, when we have a failure, that's when stuff gets tested and stress tested. So it's good if you can do that, if you can test whether something will live up to drama rather than just operate when things are going well. But guys, we've come to the end of time. I think we could possibly, although we've all got jobs to do, we could possibly have this conversation for about the next 3 days solid. I've had a great time. I appreciate all of the insights. I've learned quite a bit myself, and hopefully the attendees have. I might hand it back to Anna just to wrap it up, but thank you so much for your time. Thank you for the effort in bringing the insights to this group of people. And I hope we can continue this discussion. Certainly, my email is always open. If anybody wants to reach out, by all means do. I look forward to hearing from you. So Anna, thank you.
Thank you so much, Paul, and thank you, Kamal, Leo, and Lisa, for being our panelists today. It's been a really great discussion. Thank you, Paul, for moderating. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in, for all your questions as well, for your engagement. It was really great to have you all here. For everyone that has registered, you will receive a link to the playback of this session if you'd like to watch it again, go back to some of those great takeaways that we discussed. And so thank you all so much. Enjoy the rest of your day. We hope to see you at a future event. Bye.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye.